Hi guys, you're very welcome here. My name is Aisling and as ever I'm here today to talk about books, and I'm going to be discussing my January wrap up, so all of the books that I read in January in today's video. I felt like in 2024 I was kind of going to make a little bit of an effort to read a bit less and to be a bit more mindful about what I'm reading and to take my time with it. And I feel like January is a month that lasts about 84 weeks, and I thought I was reading quite slowly, but this morning I have finished my last book for January, which is also my 10th book for January, and I feel a little bit annoyed at myself because it was supposed to be a case of reading slowly, and somehow here we are. And I did also start out January with a really chunky book, which I like to do in January every year, just to kind of slow myself down and set myself into the year not worried about numbers and anything like that. But yeah, that's that. Let's get started. So the first book that I read obviously was my chunky book, and that chunky book was 850 pages and it was a prequel. It was A Day of Fallen Night by Samantha Shannon. This book is 850-ish pages long. I didn't read the physical copy, I won't lie, it's very heavy. Would have probably knocked me out if I tried to read it in bed. Even holding it up right now, I'm just going to rest it on my knee here. Seems to be the best way to go. Okay, so this book follows the points of view of a number of different women. So we have a young woman named Glorian, and she is in line to be queen. We have a woman in her 50s named Tunuva, and she is basically a badass warrior woman. And we also have Dumai, so a woman who has been raised on the top of an icy mountain away from a lot of civilization. And this story kind of follows the three of their lives and stories, and they're up against basically a world full of dragons. Some communities worship these dragons, but most communities don't and think that they are an absolute scourge, which they are. They absolutely kind of wipe the earth. So what happens is a lot of these kind of dragons come awake in this story, and we kind of follow that. It's a little bit difficult to speak about concisely, so I won't go too far into it, but it is the prequel to The Priory of the Orange Tree, which was set, I think, potentially thousands, definitely hundreds of years after the events in this book. I absolutely loved The Priory of the Orange Tree. I thought the characterization was really good. The plot was amazing, but I think the characters were what really sold it for me. Samantha Shannon is amazing at world building. It baffles me how people can do it, right? And I think that the characters are really well fleshed out. I think that the plotting was really good. I think that it was a triumph of a book, to be honest, and I did give it 4 stars. But yet when I compare it to The Priory of the Orange Tree, I feel like there's something missing in this one. And I would be very curious to hear somebody's perspective who reads this book first and then goes on to The Priory to see how that affects their opinions of both books. I just feel like comparing this to Priory, this one, I don't know why, but felt like it fell a little bit short. Don't get me wrong, I really enjoyed it. But I think if you're only going to read one of these books, I think Priory for me is probably the one to go for. Not to say that this was a letdown by any means. It has some great like female characters. There's some great representation in here. Some great like sapphic representation as well, like which seems to be a theme across, I think, Samantha Shannon's work as well. It's really clever. It's really well done. But I will say a lot of the world building kind of went straight over my head, but that's the kind of reader that I am. Sometimes a lot of details send me a bit astray. So yeah, I will say that I recommend this, absolutely, but Priory for me was top tier and this was good. I am doing this wrap up no notes, and normally I have some notes, so you're just gonna have to bear with me when I can't remember anything about any books, because again, that's the kind of reader that I am. So the next book then that I read was The Three Body Problem by Sitchin Liu. And this is a sci-fi novel, and again it's quite difficult to describe what it's about. So it is set in China. We are under a really strict regime, and we start out the book with a certain character's father being murdered in a public forum or something quite, what seems maybe quite arbitrary to us. So there's definitely influence of real life Chinese society within this story. So there is a secret cabal of scientists, we shall say, and one of our protagonists is asked to infiltrate this society to see what's going on. So there's, obviously I said this is a sci-fi novel. This novel is mad. So we end up in this kind of virtual world quite often, and it's really strange. It doesn't make sense, and our protagonist is kind of trying to figure out what's going on to try to beat this virtual game. And yeah, it's unusual. It's, you just don't know what's going on, and then you realize that there's a lot more to this than meets the eye, and I can't say any more. I know that this novel is described by one of its tropes, but I think that's a big spoiler, so I'm not going to mention it. I am not a huge sci-fi reader, and I found this interesting but also kind of difficult in terms of, like, I didn't want to pick it back up when I put it down, but I enjoyed it while I was reading it. It was one of those books. The story does move quite quickly, but I will say, like, a lot of it kind of did go over my head a little bit. Now, this is part of the Dark Forest trilogy. I think that's the name of the trilogy anyway, and there is a follow-up to this book, so I won't say, we don't end on a cliffhanger, but you definitely know that there is more to the story to come. And I don't think that I will continue with this series. I just think I would be kind of forcing myself if I did. Then at the same time, I am kind of curious about what's coming, so I don't know, but I do think it's a good book. I just don't think it's a good book for me. I did read an article about Ken Liu, who is the translator who translated this into English, and I found that really interesting. It was a New York Times article written a few years ago, and he spoke about how when he translates works from Chinese, how he has to be really careful because Chinese authors are writing novels and they don't want these novels to get them in trouble, so they're trying to allude to certain things. And then when he translates the novels into English, he has a really huge responsibility to translate these novels in such a way that works and that makes sense within the context of the story, but also that works in a way in which he isn't actually getting the author in trouble as well, because obviously a lot of the time the author can't read English, so doesn't know what he's writing, has to really trust him. And I just found the whole concept of all of this really mad. I never really thought about translation in this way before, and I just thought it was really interesting. And yeah, worth checking out if you're if it sounds interesting to you. Like, it's a relatively quick read, like it's a long article, but it's an article nonetheless. So yeah, I don't know how I feel about this book. I'm kind of middle of the road. Maybe I will continue, but right now I think I'm just going to park it. And then next up is a novel that I got as an e-arc from NetGalley, and the book is A Tempest of Tea by Hafsa Faisal. And I will say that I kind of got excited. Like, I knew that this novel was coming out, and then I was like, oh great, it's out in February, I think I might request this, but I didn't check the dates. And then I realised, oh, I'm actually going to have to read this immediately because I had to have my review up in a couple of days. But I did, I managed it, and I think that is a testament to this book as well. So it is a young adult book. It's a really quick read, it's really easy to read. You kind of get what you expect in terms of reading a young adult novel, but the story follows, I suppose, kind of two, if not three main protagonists. Our initial two main protagonists are two people who are essentially orphaned, and they come together in this city where this city will eat them alive. They're young kids and they kind of look out for each other, and the two of them end up setting up this kind of cafe, we'll call it. So by day it's a really successful cafe, and then by night, kind of underground, they open up for vampires, so vampires can come in to feed so that they don't have to like attack people unwillingly or anything like that. They can come in and get blood here, and the people that they feed from and the blood that they get to drink, like it's all been taken consensually, but it's still like very illegal what's going on. And some of these vampires start to go missing and nobody really knows what's happening. It's a little bit concerning. So we follow our protagonists anyway as they find out that they're about to lose the cafe, and now the cafe is their life's blood, basically, excuse the pun. They will pretty much do anything to save it. So they are tasked then with breaking into this place and retrieving something. So it becomes a heist novel. We all know that there's one really famous young adult heist novel, Six of Crows, and I think when you read, if you've read Six of Crows, I think when you read any young adult heist novel, you're going to compare it to Six of Crows. I didn't think this novel was as good as Six of Crows, but I really enjoyed it. I found it a lot of fun. I found the characters interesting. There's a little bit of romance in there as well, if that's your thing. I already can't wait for the second book because the ending of this was really good. It was a bit of a bombshell ending and I really enjoyed it. I think if this is a novel that sounds interesting to you, you should absolutely pick it up. It's quite short, it's fun, it's interesting, the plot moves. It's a heist novel, you get what you get. I would definitely recommend this one. Next up then is a novel that, it's another young adult one actually, and it's a really popular one as well. And the only reason that I bought this was I was buying something, I can't even remember what it was. To get free postage I needed to spend £4, or else I needed to spend £7 or something on postage. So I was like, okay, I'll just buy a cheap book. So I was looking for ages because I didn't want to spend the £7 anyway and end up with a book I didn't want. So I spent £4 and got a book that I didn't really want. But the book in question is A Good Girl's Guide to Murder by Holly Jackson. I feel like this one is a really well-known one and it's part of a series now. I'm not even sure how many of the books are in the series, but this one I feel like has been everywhere. So we follow a young girl and she lives in a town where a few years prior a teenager went missing, was presumed dead, and so a murder case basically was opened and they found who they believed to be the culprit and case closed. But our protagonist doesn't believe that the person that has been accused of committing the crime actually did it. Over one summer in high school, so this is set in the UK, over one summer she is doing a project and she decides to do her project on this case and she gets right up into it. So she does a lot of research. The whole way through there are loads of different characters and you're like, oh, maybe that person could have done it, maybe that person could have done it. So you're questioning a lot the whole way through. Now I did kind of question kind of early, oh, I wonder, but it was really a stab in the dark. I didn't figure out who did it. But so our little protagonist, off she goes and she really goes into it and makes the police end up looking kind of really incompetent, to be honest. And some of the things that she does, I'm like, gosh, you actually really couldn't do that in real life. But it doesn't matter because it is fiction and it's young adult and it was a lot of fun. So yeah, I won't say that I loved it, but I did enjoy it. I thought it was enjoyable, and if the next book in the series came across my desk, I would read it. Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, that's that. So then next up I read a book. It was a Mexican book and it is a book called Like Water for Chocolate by Laura Esquivel, and I think it was translated by Thomas Christensen. So I have for a while been keeping a spreadsheet where I'm trying to read a book from every country of the world, and I hadn't done Mexico yet, so now I have. That Around the World Book Challenge is not going incredibly well for me because I have definitely noticed that most of the books that I consume are books by either British or American authors, and I do want to change that, but also I do want to read all the books on my shelves this year. So I guess a little bit I am parking the Around the World Book Challenge, but picking one up here and there because most of the books on my shelves, as I said, are British or American. So yeah, there's that. But anyway, I digress. This book is an interesting one. So the format is quite unusual. So we follow a family, and at the start of every chapter, it gives a recipe. So you have the recipe, and then you kind of go into the method of the recipe, and through the method of the recipe, it kind of goes into the story of the family. So our main character is a young woman named Tita, and she lives with her family and some of her sisters, and she is absolutely in love with this one particular boy. I think his name is Pedro. I'm just going to call him Pedro. And she really wants to marry this boy, and so he comes along and he asks her mother for her hand in marriage, and her mother says no, she's my youngest daughter, so she actually can't get married because it's her role to stay with me and look after me. As in, it was tradition for the youngest daughter to stay at home and look after the mum. Fair enough, not really, but okay. So that's fine. And the mother says, but she can marry this other daughter. And he does. And so follows a story that is decades in the making. We follow this family and a series of events that comes from this sort of ill-fated marriage. It's really quirky. It's definitely heavy on the magical realism. It's quite unusual. Like, it's definitely not a believable novel by any means, but it felt quite cozy, and it was quite funny in parts, and the characters are ridiculous, and the things that happen are just mad, but in the best way. I really did enjoy this. It was a quick read. It was one I hadn't actually really heard of before until I decided to read a Mexican book, and I'm really glad that I read it. I find I have been reading some really interesting books throughout this Around the World Book Challenge, so I might actually do an update video on that just to let you know what I have read and so on and so forth and where we stand. But yeah, so in a nutshell, mad, but entertaining. And then the next book that I finished was an audiobook that I was listening to for 84 years, and that was A Discovery of Witches by Deborah Harkness. We follow a scholar, and she is working in, I think it's Oxford University in England. She is American. I think she's a history scholar, and she is a witch, but for the entirety of her life she has denied her powers despite her family trying to train her. She wants nothing to do with it. She just thinks it's all trouble. In the library one day, she takes out this book and something really strange happens. So when she brings it back, then she realizes that this book was really special, and a lot of people really want to get their hands on this book, but it's protected by a spell, and they want to know how come she was able to take out this book, and how did she manage to break this spell that's protecting this book, and so on and so forth. So this is where the novel goes, and she meets this other academic, and he happens to be a vampire. That's the setup for the story, and it was quite fun, I think, in the setup, but then it just kept going on and on, I think, and where it really lost me was a romance develops in the book, and they're absolutely madly in love with each other after like 2 or 3 weeks. So it's very insta love. So there was a lot more romance in this than I was expecting, and I think that's probably where it lost me. I'm not much of a romance reader. I think what ruined this book for me were my own expectations. I don't want to talk about it too much because I just didn't enjoy it. That said, it's a book that a lot of people are going to find really fun, but I just don't think that I personally am the intended audience for this book. And I also really don't understand why it was so long. And then the next book that I read is a book that has been sitting on my shelves for quite some time, and that book is Cloud Cuckoo Land by Anthony Doerr. This book, hey? So this book is a book that follows multiple points of view in many different times. Well, I say many, I think like 3. So we are set in Constantinople, I think in the 15th century, and then we are in sort of present day, and then there's another point of view that is, I think, maybe a few decades into the future from now. The people in this novel are all connected through this one sort of really old manuscript or really old book, and we follow them as each of them are impacted by this book in some way. It's a really difficult one to describe. I will say I had a preference for maybe the current day points of view, but each time that I read a different point of view, I absolutely enjoyed it. I really wanted to know where this book went. In the 1400s, we're following a young girl named Anna who is a seamstress in, I think, like a monastery. And then there's a young boy named Omer who lives with his family and is born with a cleft palate, and everybody believes that he basically is a demon and has brought a lot of ill fortune onto his family. It's really sad. He has this lovely connection with animals, and I will say that I got really attached to some of the animals in this book and found some of their stories really quite harrowing but lovely at the same time. We then follow a young boy named Seymour in kind of current day, and Zeno, who is an old man, and how their stories intertwine. And then in the future there is a girl named Constance. She's hurtling through space to a new land, and I feel like my description of this book, it's just really not doing it justice. Firstly, is written beautifully. It is really paced perfectly. The characters are really themselves. They're unique. None of the characters are the same. They all have their part to play within the story. Can you tell I really enjoyed this book? I thought it was just such a feat for an author to have written a book like this. Like Anthony Doerr wrote All the Light We Cannot See, which was a relatively straightforward sort of book. And then there was this one. And I don't know how he went from that to this, because I feel like we're almost getting two different authors. No shade to All the Light We Cannot See. I really enjoyed it, but I just feel like he didn't just step up, like he stepped up to here with this book. And we get historical fiction, we get contemporary fiction, we get sci-fi, we get kind of a story about ancient Greek texts, we get a story about family, we get romance, we get a lot of things in this book, and I'm annoyed at myself for not having picked it up sooner. I really loved it. And I know that it's not going to be for everybody. It's going to be one of those ones that some people just don't get. But if you love a story that really spans time, it really spans different places, it's a little bit intriguing, it's very lyrical and literary, this might be one worth checking out. I thought it was very, very good. Next, then I read a really well-known memoir, and that memoir was Wild by Cheryl Strayed. So there was a film made of this book as well, and I did watch the film around the time that it came out, like well over a decade ago. I just felt like, hey, maybe I'll just read the book. We follow a young woman who is in her mid-20s, who is newly divorced, and her mum has passed away a few years prior, and the death of her mother was really traumatic and really impactful for her and sent her essentially into a spiral, into a really bad place. And after she divorces her husband, she gets it into her head that she's gonna hike the Pacific Coastal Trail, which is a relatively new trail that spans, I think, from Mexico up toward Canada. But the section of the trail that she decides to do, it's not the full thing, but it's still like 1,000 miles or something like that. She has very little money, very little prospects, has never done long distance hiking, doesn't know what she's doing, starts out with a backpack that is way overpacked that she can hardly lift, doesn't know what she's doing, and decides to walk, just to walk it all off. And it is the kind of memoir that you could expect. She comes across a lot of adversity, she meets a lot of people, and she also delves into what led her to deciding to step out onto this trail. I did enjoy it. It made me want to go for a really long walk, which sadly is impossible for me. It was, I suppose, in a way quite inspiring and spoke a lot about the landscape and the land and things like that. It's something that I really enjoy. Yeah, it is what it is. I enjoyed it. There was a part in it about a horse, and it was a difficult part and I didn't like it, and I don't know why it was included in the story, because it wasn't a present day thing, it was something that happened in the past. After I read that, I kind of put down the book and didn't pick it up for a while. Just be wary that there is something a bit not nice happens to a horse in it, and if you're not into that, I'm really not into that. Like, it's the one thing that I yeah, so I put it down for a while and eventually picked it back up, and it was okay again after that. But there is that part. You kind of know what you're getting into. She goes for a long walk and it's very introspective. Next up then was a book that I listened to on audio, and it was All's Well by Mona Awad. We follow a woman who works in the theatre department of a school, and she lives with significant chronic pain since an accident that she had a few years prior. So she really struggles with chronic pain, has gone through kind of every treatment, has gone through everything, tried every medication, tried everything, tried every therapy, gone to so many different doctors, been dismissed so much. This is something that I can heavily relate to. So when I was listening to this, I was just so floored, because living with chronic pain can feel like such a lonely thing. And what a lot of people don't realize is that there are a lot of people in the world who live with significant chronic pain that significantly impacts their lives, that really upsets them, and they go around and they look like they're absolutely fine. This book really delved into that, and the loneliness, and how you feel so dismissed all the time, how you chase all of these promises. The next person says, I can fix you, I can fix you. And you do all these things and you wonder if maybe this is the right way, but they're a professional, so they're going to help. And then it makes you worse. And it really dealt with so much of my own personal experience. So I think that my sort of enjoyment of this book definitely is affected by how kind of personally seen I felt while listening to this book. But then it gets weird. The whole story really spirals into something that I wasn't expecting. So I think for me, I really enjoyed the opening of the book and getting to know our main character and getting to know her situation and hearing about the struggles that she's having in the school where she wants to put on the play All's Well, but like all of the students are kind of going against her and they don't want to put on this particular play. That was all well and good. It was great. Really loved it so far. And then I just think it just got a bit strange, and I feel like it was a novel in two parts, and I really enjoyed the first part and I didn't enjoy the second part, unfortunately. I know though that a lot of people are really going to love this book, so give it a go if it sounds like something for you, but it wasn't necessarily for me. The last book of January was My Neighbour Totoro by Hayao Miyazaki and Tsuchiko Kubo, and this was translated by Jim Hubbard from Japanese. So this story is obviously really well known. The story was written after the film. I have never actually seen the film, so when I was reading this book, it was completely new to me. So it is a children's book, and we follow two girls and their father as they move to this kind of old house in a forest to be close to the hospital where the mother of the family is staying while she's unwell. And we follow these two girls as they go about their kind of day-to-day life. I think one is 4 and one is 11, and so one of them is in school and one of them isn't, and the younger girl kind of comes across this creature in the forest, our man Totoro, and not a whole lot happens. I expected a lot more Totoro. I was really surprised by the lack of Totoro, to be honest with you. So, oh, okay. It's a nice kids book, but I did feel like maybe there was something missing. Now, the film is so hyped that I feel like I also definitely had really high expectations for this book as well. So yeah, I am going to go watch the film at some point soon, I think, as well. It was definitely a fun little read. Wasn't what I expected, but it's not a new favourite either. Sorry. And that's that then. That's the whole lot. All of the books that I read for the month of January. Have you read any of these books? Do you agree? Do you disagree? What was your favourite book that you read in the month of January? I'd love to know. Tell me in the comments below. Also, I'd love to know something that really made you smile this week. So please do let me know. Put a little bit of positivity down in the comments below. Other than that, thanks so much for watching. Thanks for being here. I really appreciate it. Please do give me a like or a subscribe if you're feeling it. Absolutely no worries if not. And otherwise, mind yourself, take care, and I'll talk to you next week. Bye bye.